How men and women relate to each other is one of the big topics of our day, and in these passages we glimpse the best and the worst aspects of close relationships. Was Mark's stark way of expressing things intended as a discussion starter in the early church? So I'm reading Mark, and we're reading from Good as New, which is a radical retelling of the scriptures. Jesus moved on, this time south to the province of Judea and across to the other side of the River Jordan, where once again a large crowd had gathered. Jesus taught them as usual. Some of the strict set came to him with a trick question. "Does our religion allow divorce?" Jesus answered. "What ruling did Moses give?" They replied, "Moses allowed the husband to divorce his wife by writing her a certificate of separation." Jesus said, "Moses made that provision because of your insensitive attitude to women. But God's creation included female as well as male. That's why in our wedding ceremonies, it's the man who has to leave his parents and go to join his wife, and then the two are united. If God has brought them together, no one should separate them." Back in the house, Jesus' followers brought up the topic again. Jesus explained, "Anyone who turns their back on their partner to go with someone else does a very wicked thing. It's wrong to destroy one relationship in order to have another. It makes no difference whether it's a woman or a man who is responsible." People were bringing their children for Jesus to hold, but his friends tried to shoo them off. This made Jesus very angry, and he said, "Let the children come to me, never try to stop them. They already belong to God's new world. In fact, anyone who doesn't naturally accept God's new world in the way a child does has no chance of being part of it." Then Jesus took the children in his arms, cuddled them, and made them laugh.
My late brother Roger started a project to look at our family history and tree. And he got a large piece of wallpaper. It was about this long. And starting with our family, we worked back and back and back. And way up the top, isolated from everybody else, is a John Purling. And underneath, fought at the Battle of Waterloo. And I'm an avowed pacifist. And I have this relative who went to war. It gets worse. In Oswald Pryor's book about Australia's little Cornwall, he describes an incident where a James Williams and a James Purling went to a little hut above the mine, and there they had their crib. You know what the crib is? In the old Cornish pasty. And then they lay down to have a little nap on a couple of planks. But unfortunately, they had left a candle burning on a box. They fell asleep. The candle burnt down, and in the box there were detonators and explosives. James Williams died the next day. James Purling survived. One of my ancestors. My mother's side, great-great-grandfather and grandmother George and Mary sailed from England and arrived in South Australia and set up a farm at Riverton. On the way out, they had two daughters. I mean, they had the two daughters they brought with them. They didn't actually have them on the way. Yeah, see what I mean? And they died. Both of them died on the voyage. They had another lot of children, and most of whom died. My ancestors, families. I'm sure you have got stories about your families. But when we come to the text today, it does relate to families. Marriage, divorce, children. Jesus' family. We don't know much about it. In fact, the only time we see a little glimpse in the stories is when Jesus was in the temple and answering and asking questions of the elders, and then not worrying about whether his parents were looking for him. You know that little incident? And then later on, when the disciples came and said, "Your mother and brethren are here to see you," he said, Who's my mother? Who are my brothers and sisters? Those who are in ministry with me. They're my family. Almost brushing off his biological family. So families at the time of Jesus were important, and particularly in the Roman world. The Romans' biggest criticism of Christianity was that it broke up families. We remember that Jesus, on a journey, called in Gentile territory, he called people to leave their families and follow him. There was a sociology professor who used to start one of his lectures with a story about a letter he had. He said he had this letter that was written by some parents to a government official because they were concerned about their son. Their son, who'd been a wonderful son to them, obedient and helpful, had left them to join some religious group, and it was destroying them. And they wanted this government official to step in and try and stop this religious group from holding their son from them. And then he would stop and say, "Well, what's that all about?" And the students would answer, "Well, some crazy religious group like the Moonies or somebody like that." And he said, "No. It was written in the 3rd century to the Roman government, and the crazy group that they were referring to were the Christians." Well, here we have a story. Well, we have two stories, so we broke it up into two parts. I love Henson's way of describing the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were good people. They were devout, and they knew their law. They knew the Torah. But Jesus was upsetting them. So Henson calls them the strict group, or the strict sect. And then Henson also calls Jesus' way of talking about his mission as the new world, leading people from the current situation into a vision of a new world of love and of justice. So here we have Jesus on the way. Well, that's sort of shorthand for saying Jesus is heading to Jerusalem, and we know what awaits him. We know the end result. And here he meets with this strict set with a trick question, or a question to test him. Really, it's to test his orthodoxy, to test whether he's really thinking the way they think. And so they use the notion of divorce. Rabbi, teacher, is it right for a man to divorce his wife? A tricky one. It wasn't as though Jesus was kind of... it tells us in the text that he was on his way, and on the way he taught them. It wasn't as though Jesus kind of sat down and said, "Righto, come right out, look, we're going to talk about divorce today, okay?" That's not the topic he would have picked on the way to his final destination. He wouldn't have chosen that as the topic of the day. But they were using that as a ruse, as a means of getting at him. Where did this take place? In the region of Herod Antipas. Now, you know that name, Herod Antipas. He divorced his wife so he could marry somebody else, and she divorced her husband so she could marry him. So it's all mixed up with divorces. And who stood up and said, "This isn't right"? John the Baptizer. And John the Baptizer For interfering, it cost him his life. So they want to know if Jesus is going to say something that will trap him, that they can take this back to Herod so that they can get Herod to do their dirty work for them, and they can sit back and watch. So is it really a question that they want answered about divorce? Or is it a means of trapping Jesus? So there's both maybe a curiosity about how he will answer this, and also there's a political reason. So Jesus' answer, what did Moses say? What did Moses say? He said you could write out a certificate of divorce. Oh, that's easier said than done. How many people could write? So maybe it was a lot harder than one thinks. And then Jesus goes back, well, what was the intention in the first place about men and women? I wrestled with this text because I know people who have been hurt by people using this text when they've found it necessary to be divorced. They have been hurt by the church and its attitude. We live in a different world. There's no question about that. The Protestant tradition, most of the Protestant churches now accept divorce and remarriage without question as a way of extending grace. The Uniting Church certainly has done that, and in 1997 a statement was very clearly made to show there is no impediment to marriage of someone who is divorced and want to be remarried. So the model that was in Jesus' day was the Old Testament model of marriage, which wasn't all that flash. I mean, they had their wife, they also had their concubine. That was all very tickety-boo. So Jesus, in this answer that he gave, showing the intention, but then there was the frailty of human beings. You remember that occasion when the disciples with Jesus were walking through a paddock, and it was the Sabbath, and they were hungry, and they plucked some wheat and they ate the grains, and they were criticised for it because it was on the Sabbath. And what the Gospels tell us Jesus said was, hang on, the Sabbath was made for human beings, not the other way around. And I think you could apply that same kind of logic to what Jesus was doing in handling this trick question. That people matter more than those sort of set rules. People matter most. And I wonder if it's no coincidence of the juxtaposition between that story and the little one at the bottom of that about the children. For here Jesus clearly crossed the line, crossed the boundaries, and accepted those who were vulnerable, weak, could not necessarily decide for themselves, and loved them. Now, when I was preparing, I thought, that's what I should be preaching on, that tail end bit. It would be wonderful. Everybody would enjoy that. Jesus was there teaching, and so the disciples said, no, stop, don't worry the master. Maybe they were kind of, concerned for him. He'd been teaching and preaching. Well, he's tired. But Jesus didn't see it like that. He saw that they were preventing these little ones from access to the grace and the love and the friendship that he had to offer. So he was cross with them. Do not forbid them, for to such belong the kingdom, the new world of love and of justice. So these two stories brought together shows the kind of upside down world of God, where all, even the most weak and the most vulnerable, belong. And that's good as new. Amen.